Okay, everyone. So in this lecture, we're going to be looking at how we can actually start coding using these HTML concepts that we learned in the previous lecture. And the way that we're going to do this is by using the the URL lib module. Now, what this module is it's going to be able to make requests to the internet, and then we are going to be able to parse those requests and do stuff in our Python code with the output of them. Now, you're going to be doing something a little similar to this for your lab with code instead of an actual website. So it is important to double check how this works and just experiment with a few ideas on your end with this. Okay, so to get started, what I'm going to do is inside of where I had my files from the previous session, I'm going to go ahead and just create a new idle program. I'm going to copy one from in here. You don't need to do this if you just want to make a new one. That's fine. I'm just going to call this practice for here. And I'm going to go ahead and open this guy. And you'll notice here, before we even look at all the imports that are up here, I'm just going to make a new script. So I'm going to run this. We'll get an error here, which is fine, but I just want to showcase, let me see if I can restart my shell here, showcase what's going on here. So to go ahead and actually access our URL lib module, we're going to do an import statement, and you can actually do this from in place right here. It's going to be from URL lib.request import URL open. Now, after you go ahead and you open this one, you can create a variable. This doesn't need to be called response. This could be called R. And we're going to use the URL open command. And why don't we try to just open up Google like normal? So I'm going to look at Google. I'm going to copy it over here. And I'm going to copy it into here. And now if I do a print of R, you'll notice that I get this http.client.response object at the memory address. So again, this is similar to what we saw already with our previous examples. And we can also try out the type of R. Oops, sorry for the syntax. We'll see that we get this class again. And now, because this is an object and it has a bunch of setters and getters a part of it, we can use these to do any amount of work that we want to. Now, you'll notice here, if I do r.read, you'll see a bunch of things going on, and it seems it's really convoluted looking, but you might notice right away, what do you see? You see these type of brackets that are here. And what all these are is actually HTML code with the source attributes and the types. So this is how we can get them. Now, if you want to get very specific with what you would need, see here, let's go to the bottom. What we could say is something like r.getHeaders. And we can see here that we'll get the headers that are a part of any URL that we are using. If we don't want to get the headers, maybe we want to get the URL that's a part of it. You'll see now I'm able to get the URL. So again, this one might be a bit redundant because we provided it the URL, but this is a nice way to say, oh, whatever the user provides, can you go in there and grab it and then get the URL from there. There's some more useful methods here, like URL lib request, which has this module called URL retrieve, which gives us the URL and the file name. And it copies a network object denoted by URL to a local file. This is really interesting. So what we could say here now is I'm going to say from URL lib.request import URL retrieve. There we go. So now I have this retrieve, and what I could say here is inside of my current file, wherever it is, I could go ahead and save this somewhere. So if I'm going to go ahead and say URL retrieve, what am I going to retrieve? Why don't I retrieve from Google? And why don't I save it into a TXT file like so? Now we'll see here that I now have in this background this new TXT file called Google. And lo and behold, it is the all the code from before that we saw in our Python file saved in here. So this is just a very brief way of looking at the URL retrieve models, how we can operate with them inside of our Python code, and definitely play around with it and try to make sure your imports are running, and take a look at the crawler and first crawler as well for more examples too.